Hello, and welcome to Sacred Herbalism, the full moon segment of the Elder Tree podcast, where we explore how plants and fungi can support us to enter into a sacred relationship with life and the living world. I'm your host, Stephanie Hazel, herbalist, anthropologist, and a deep lover of this wild world. Let's walk into the moonlit forest together, into a world of magic, mysticism, psychedelic teachers, and, of course, the plants themselves. Are you ready? Hello, dear listeners. Happy full moon, and I hope this first month of the year has been full of gentle reflection, inspiration, and dreaming into the year ahead. This episode is an interview with Bellingen herbalist Rachel Maree. She recently relocated from Nimbin. I don't know if you ever heard of a herbal gathering called Rebel Herbal, but she organised and ran a very grassroots and radical herbal conference one time, and it was amazing. My favourite herbal event I've been to. If you've heard of that, then that's Rachel Maree behind that creation. So as well as being a clinical Western herbalist, she's also a very skilled and, I would say, patiently dedicated medicine maker, massage therapist, somatic coach, and a rites of passage guide. And she has a really fascinating history of travel and entheogenic initiation that informs her practice and her relationship with plants that we explore it more in the interview. And honestly, I've rarely felt so deeply aligned in an interview with the person I'm talking to. So this was really special for me. It feels like maybe we've drunk from the same well of plant medicine. Like she's a real companion in the particular way of plant medicine that has been unfolding for me. This interview highlights the intricate connections between herbalism, cultural practices, and ecological belonging and personal healing. We explore how plants connect to ceremony and connection to land, as well as our shared kind of emergent understanding of how each plant has a unique emotional terrain that's linked to the ecological terrain it thrives in, as within, so without. And I particularly enjoy her take on what herbalism might look like in 500 years, as well as her experiences of indigenous Australian herbal practice, which she shares with us. Enjoy the episode, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Welcome, Rachel. It's really, really lovely to have you on. We've been trying to have a cup of tea in person for a couple of years and didn't quite make it happen. And now you've left Nimbin and relocated to Bellingen, so virtual cup of tea it is.
It's lovely to have a chat with you, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm. What's in your teacup?
I have a full mix. It's like rose, tulsi, guayusa. I love guayusa from the Amazon. There's also some licorice. And yeah, there's a couple other herbs. Ginkgo, that's it.
I've been having a bit of a love of ginkgo lately too. Yeah, but I'm actually drinking, it's called Kwan Ying Dong Ding. It's a dark roasted oolong. So a friend of mine's really into specific Chinese teas and I've been experimenting. But yeah, it's really nice to have something. It's almost like black tea, but a bit more gentle, you know.
Yeah, okay. I really got into white tea for a phase there. Just loving how it's like so clean and really nice energy.
Actually, it's interesting because you were saying just before that you're doing a lot of extraction, you're doing a lot of tincture making at the moment, especially just as you've moved to Bellingen and you're, you have a different community and not as many clients. And I think that the tea world, the Chinese tea world, is such an interesting example of how you can get so many different kinds of medicine and activity from one plant, depending on the preparation method, right?
That's so true. Yeah, it's all the Camellia sinensis, right? And just different curings.
Different times of picking, and I think that even the white tea is grown in the shade, and I think that I can fall into the trap of thinking like, oh well, plantain is plantain, right? But of course the medicine of that plant is somewhat different depending on the soil, the microclimate. Even I feel like in some really old herb books, I've even seen references of saying like, oh, lady's mantle should be picked at this phase of the moon, as soon as the dewdrops have dried in the morning on a north-facing hill, or like that level of specificity being indicated in some of these old European herbals. That's completely gone from herbalism today.
Right. Yeah. It does feel like the potent medicine of a plant is sometimes connected to its wildness. I know there's like us curating the plant for our needs, but I always have this sense that when a plant chooses to grow somewhere and it's just in its little pocket thriving, that it's something around that ecology that's so suited for it. And I just feel like the authority of the plant deciding where it will thrive, that we can't curate that.
Mm. Yeah, and I love that you've just given the plant that agency of that there's like an intentionality in how it's thriving and where it's choosing to live. And I guess as a colonizer, or as a colonial community in Australia where we mainly are working with European plants, there's an interesting tension point there, right? Because if a European medicinal plant is thriving in the wild here, it's also a weed.
Hmm. I've been really trying to come to terms with the camphor laurels lately because of that. Like our ancestors must have planted them because they're big shade trees and they provide a lot of shade for cattle and they grow really quickly and they're along the fence lines. They're so weedy and they are really beautiful. They're really here now. And I think like plants like that kind of remind me of our history a little bit, of like outsiders coming in and then sort of like making home. So I've just been trying to really come to peace with like that they have a place, that these like wild plant, like these weedy plants from overseas do have a place now.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing. And in the coming to terms with that, we also get closer to coming to terms with the fact that we might have a place here now too.
Yes, right. Yes.
Wouldn't that be nice? There's an episode that I recorded about a year ago with a Dutch herbalist called Mariana Housing, and she was visiting, and I think she's the most published herbalist in the Dutch language. She's quite, she's an elder herbalist in that community, and she also has books about tree medicine and tree listening. And she does work with even the foresters in the state forest management people doing tree listening, getting them connecting to plants in the Netherlands, which is so cool. And so she was here visiting, and I had been the same process of trying to come to terms with the camphor laurels because they're really just insane on this land. Like there's so many of them, and they're just taking up so much space. And I pull out hundreds of little camphor laurel seedlings every year, and still they're like spreading. And she knows nothing about the plants here or anything about the history. And I was like, look, could you have a chat to those trees? Because I just want to know what their deal is. And if that's your thing, talking to trees, then, please do. So she did, and went and did a whole process sitting with one. And she said some interesting things. One of them is that it was like a full purification medicine, and she felt the camphors like burning away all of this trauma in her womb and cleansing her channels to be able to connect more deeply to spirit, which was interesting. And they said to her, we really want Stephanie to use us as medicine. We really want to be used as medicine. Like we're medicine trees. And in India and Japan and China, they're revered sacred trees. Have you ever seen the movie My Neighbor Totoro?
Oh, it's the Totoro tree,
It's
right?
the Totoro tree. It's a camphor
Like it's
laurel.
actually a really sacred tree
It's
in other
really
contexts.
totally. And also, camphor is used as a medicine, like respiration and mental
Mhm.
clarity. And it used to be like smelling salts, fainting, and there's all this medicine the plant has. I mean, even right, and the muscle pain, lineaments, and stuff. Yeah. And then the other thing they told her was that they know they're a problem. They can't stop. They can't stop breeding because this climate is just too easy for them. And they're sorry. And they're really happy to be cut down as long as they get used as medicine or timber. And that they said, but just be careful because we're holding all the hillsides together.
Wow.
Since then, I'm trying to feel more friendly towards them, and I stop and I say hello. And
Hmm.
yeah.
What a beautiful message to come through from the campers. I can really relate to a lot of what you shared.
Hmm.
Well, I'm always really grateful when I find our European plants really wild and like I just recognize them. I recently drove to Armidale and all along the way is mullein and yarrow and nettle. And it feels so familiar, and to find so much medicine along the sides of the road, it always lights me up, even if it is, I know, not from this land.
It is now, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And excellent medicine.
Hmm. Yeah, and if we think about the fact that the campers are so good at making a really dense canopy very quickly, there's sure we have all the other plants on the land are like lily pillies and brush boxes, and they're not as dense and they're slower growing. And that if this land used to be rainforest, so the true rainforest species need that really dense canopy to return. And so perhaps if we just left it for 200 years, the campers would actually start dying back to a more balanced part of the ecosystem once the rainforest was here.
Yeah, I think a lot of things, when looked at through the perspective of deep time, come good. It's just, we're in such a narrow window. I have seen red cedars growing underneath campers and figs. So I think plants they start to find their way under the shade and grow up. I mean, all the plants are here to rehabilitate something, right? Like you said, the campers said it's just so easy for them. They like love that terrain. And if there's space, something will take it up. It's hard to be mad at something for taking up space and thriving. Like I think it's just inbuilt in the system.
It's an extension of our tall poppy syndrome. Be like, no, camper, you're thriving too much. We're not okay with that. Fight for the underdog. So
Yeah, right.
you said in this perspective of deep time, everything comes good. So what are some of the thoughts you have about like deep time and like a 500-year plan around herbalism and plant relationship? What?
The first thing I ponder is that I have a lot of hope, and I feel like a hope is like a kind of existential standpoint at which that it's really important to keep alive. Because if we don't have the thoughts and the beliefs that there is good in this world um, and that things will come good, that we're going to keep moving through these changes, then if we don't have the hope, then it's definitely not going to happen. Beliefs is right where it starts. So, firstly, I'd have a lot of positive thoughts and beliefs around where we're headed. And in terms of plants in our relationships, I hope there's so many plants around, so much diversity. But, we don't really know. We're in such an incredible time of change right now, like in the great simplification, a great drawback of change, when a precipice or an end of one epoch and the beginning of another. So I think it feels like a really important time to keep the sacredness of our relationship with plants alive, so that we are just planting these seeds for the future. I really love how in First Nations American traditions, they always talk about things in 7 generations. So the actions we do now, we need to think about how they're going to affect the grandchildren 7 down the line. And that will help us know if that was like a right decision or a wrong decision. So I just like to think in that kind of way of like, yeah, there's our day-to-day needs and decisions, but there's also like, well, how's that impacting 7 generations down the line?
And what do you think the role of herbalism is in moving the world to a place that is, the 7 generations down the line can be thriving?
I can't imagine humans thriving without plants.
Mm.
I mean, unless we're no longer humans, like unless we're some kind of digital version of ourselves, like biological animal humans and our culture, I can't imagine us without plants. And when I say like plants, I don't really just mean plants, herbs, like plants, fungi, and bacteria, and all of the like ecological medicine and our kin on the earth. I can't imagine us. Like, I think we are made up so deeply of them, and our health thrives only when we're in deep relationship to our ecology.
Mm.
So 500 years down the line, I see us thriving. I see us in really deep relationship. I see science no longer being pinned to materialism, but like moving really deep into ways that things we haven't even studied yet of how we are in relationship and are working and collaborating together on this planet with all the living things, especially plants and herbs.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree, but it's lovely to hear you say with such passion. Just to backtrack, give us a bit of background on you. I'd love to know what was the call that got you into herbalism? What did that entry point look like for you?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I think a lot of people would be able to relate to a feeling of not having their needs met by some of the things on offer in our kind of modern world. And when it came to my health, I was sort of inside the medical system from a younger age, like kind of feeling like I was in a bit of a washing machine, like tumbling around and um, not reaching healing. So I was like going through different therapies under the guidance of my parents and under the guidance of doctors. And then that led me to this journey that really just set me up for my whole life, actually. I'm so grateful for all that sickness as a child because it really set me up to claim a lot of my own authority. And that's what led me to herbalism, actually. It when I was younger and I tried working with a naturopath and an Ayurvedic doctor, it all felt kind of soft to me and I couldn't perceive any of its medicine. But inevitably in my young 20s, I went back to those modalities and I studied herbalism and studied a bit of Chinese medicine and have gone on to continue to study botany, and plants are like now my whole life and they hold me so strongly in my health. Yeah, so that's kind of what led me to the path, was like a lot of like grimy emotions around not having my needs met through what's on offer through the medical system.
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely one of the pathways, isn't it? Like quite a few people being like, "Oh, I had an early experience of that we don't have a health system," and then wanting to find something that was more, yeah, that actually was could answer complexity in bodies. And plants are so good at that because they're so complex, you know. And if you look at the hundreds of chemicals in one plant compared to the one chemical in a pharmaceutical, like that's such a blunt instrument that the pharmaceutical is going to whack that one thing really hard, but it's can't dance with complexity, and so much of our health problems are complex because the human body is so complex.
That's so beautifully said. Like at this point in my life, I find it quite risky to take something that's so refined. Like, where there are specific, very specific moments when pharmaceuticals are useful, but I feel a lot more trust in the complexity of a plant, that it won't dysregulate a whole lot of other symptoms in my body. It's like a whole plant for a whole person is. I feel so much more safety and trust in that.
There's a kind of intelligence inside that complexity, right? Like even if we don't go so far, and I think you and I both do go so far as to ascribe a kind of beingness to different plants and a spirit and an inspirited nature to plants, even if you don't go that far, there's still a kind of innate intelligence in that level of complex checks and balances in chemistry.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you think, and many of us think about like how many constituents are inside a plant, then we couldn't even add up what the amount of chemical reactions it's going to cause in our body. Like it would be in the thousands. It's like untraceable. I don't know. I like whole foods, whole medicine, whole body. I just like put a lot more trust in a whole system.
And it's not just like it sounds like it's not just an intellectual trust, but it's a lived trust that you went through the system of those blunt instruments and it didn't work for you. I don't know what it looked like for you, but I think for a lot of people there's that it's not just the herbs, but it's as we move into right relationship with our bodies, with the earth, into living in a more, I guess, ancestral, balanced, evolutionary, compatible way, then
Yeah.
health returns. Health is more than just the symptom we're working with. It's also the psyche and the spirit and the feeling of connectedness and all of those things, right?
So much so that I actually think most of what you said is more like the side of health than just the constituents of the plant. Like in all my early years of working with herbs, I had a lot of very severe health issues. And until I entered into like a more deep understanding of right relationship with plants, there actually wasn't a lot of healing happening. It's like the constituents alone weren't enough. But once I entered into more of an understanding of its intelligence and a respect um, for myself and for being in relationship to myself and to plants, that's when healing really was accessible to me. And I've come to believe that it's such an important piece that the plants teach us about the consciousness of our planet, or the intelligence of our planet, about the interbeing, like living in a state of connectedness with things, that is actually health.
Can you give me a bit more clarity around what that looked like for you?
Mm, yeah, for me, my personal story led me to traveling a lot around the world to sit with different cultures and their traditional medicines. And because I was using herbalism, I was studying herbalism, I was using the Western herbs, and it was like not getting right to the depth of the imbalances that I was holding on to. So actually, plants led me to experiencing more culture, like people that are in relationship plants and the culture that they have around those plants. So I went to Mexico and worked with a abuelita, a grandmother there, and we worked with mushrooms and we worked with salvia divinorum. And it was part of a ceremony and there were songs and she spoke in a Mazatec language, or like traditional language. That was a piece of my healing. Also, a really big piece of my healing was when I went to Gabon in West Central Africa and went through a rite of passage there with Iboga. And in those are examples that I like to use because it wasn't just the plants. Like it wasn't that I went and had those plants and the plants is what brought me back into right relationship and health. There was a part of the culture and the people's relationship with the plants and the way that those plants helped them to express their humanness through dance and song and rituals and togetherness and healthy community. That was a huge healing piece for me. And yeah, that's why I believe that it's not just the medicine inside the plants, but it's how it teaches us to, how plants can teach us to be part of an ecology, to even just inhabit our own body and be part of our own ecology. But the healing kind of keeps going into like our belonging to the land and our belonging to our community and our belonging to our family.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And there's definitely it feels so pertinent because we're in this transformation around the cultural positioning of psychedelic plants right now. And I think you and I have been involved in the entheogenic community for a really long time, and so we've watched the transition and the transformation of entheogens and psychedelics as this very underground, politically dangerous thing to be associated with, to being kind of cool and becoming mainstream. And even like all these people who 10 years ago would have totally turned away from psychedelics now looking for that. And so it's a really interesting process of transformation. And on one hand, I'm really happy about it, but there's all these things that I see that your story points to. Yes, everyone now wants to take magic mushrooms therapeutically, and mostly how that's being accessed in the mainstream is a psychologist who has no relationship to that medicine, who has no relationship to spirit. And I'm sure there are some who do, right? Like, it's not everyone. But in the main, it's like giving a drug that happens to be a psychedelic plant, and that's the thing that's going to change everything, rather than the context of exactly what you're saying, that cultural repositioning that plant allows to happen and unfold in the community.
Yes, so beautifully said. The cultural repositioning is allowed. I feel like that's a big healing piece for all of us. It'll be an interesting journey with the medicalization of entheogens. We're here, we've got front row tickets for this journey. I'm intrigued to see how it all unrolls. Yeah, but I mean, I love entheogens. They're such powerful teachers, but I also love all the plants. I feel like we can allocate a lot of sacredness to those plants because they show up at times when we need to be really connected to ourselves. We need to anchor and ground because they're really big transition times. And I feel like it's in those times to get through them, like we need to access more of our connection to Great Spirit or to our belonging to ourselves or to our community. There was like times of birth and rites of passage and big healing crises and times of death, grieving times. Like these sort of sacred plants seem to arise in those transition times. But I do believe that any of the plants can just teach us about our belonging, but there's more subtleties and grossnesses, and entheogens are like less subtle.
And we're not really into subtlety as a culture, right? It's like big is better, more is better. If a little bit's good, then let's take 10 times that dose. And I mean, dosage is a whole other thing, right? But absolutely, there's such an invitation for us to engage with all the plants in that way we were just saying, right? Of not just being constituents, but being teachers, doorways into and teachers of connectedness.
Yeah. When I think about the celebrations that our ancestors used to have, and also nations all around the world continue to have, they tend to be seasonal times, at times at which summer's coming to an end and autumn's beginning, as we mark the transition, or the time of the solstices. They're like moments that are in the ecology itself, and they're times of change where things are transitioning. So I feel like transition itself is sacred, and that's when plants really, like every culture has a plant that's been holding them as a people and also in their celebration times. And I love that. I love that part of understanding like people and their relationship with plants and what plants show up for that. It's not always entheogens. Like some of our most like reliable plants are tool making plants and basket weaving plants and the sagos and the rattans
Yeah.
and
And the
corn
grapes, like,
and the grapes.
the
Yeah.
grapes, right? I thought of my dad, who's a French man who drinks a lot of red wine, and probably for him, the plant that's held him through his life and moments of grief, moments of change, have been the grapevine
And hops.
and
I mean,
hops.
I think
Yeah.
hops holds us a lot.
Yeah, my partner's a very pitta person and has some sleep issues, and being, hops is such a great pitta plant. Like, it's so cooling and draining of heat and tension, which is why people crave a beer on a hot day after lots of physical activity, right? And also, I think why men tend to like beer more than women, because not as many women have that kind of overheated, overtense constitution.
Mm.
Um, but alcohol doesn't really agree with him, and then so I just started making like a really strong hops tea and putting it in the fridge, and he would have that with just like on in soda water with a bit of lemon, and he's like, oh, it's so much better than a beer. It does the thing that I like about beer. And he realized, like, and it was, for me as a herbalist, it was really obvious, right? But imagine lots of average blokes in Australia, if they realized that the hops was what they were really after in the beer, it'd be a bit of a mind blown moment, right?
Yeah, like just imagining the average Australian man having a hops iced tea.
And be like, oh yeah, hits the spot,
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of thing I'm imagining. 500 years down the line, our culture has changed so much. We are so diversified. We've stopped thinking about things in such monocropped ways, and we're holding a lot of complex capacity within us and centered in our hearts. And there's a lot of plants and herbs working together with us.
Yes, and like an ecosystemic intelligence and wisdom that has blossomed inside the human culture.
Yeah,
Ah,
I don't see it any other way, because what I see happening with the clients I've worked with over the years and what I see happening within myself is that the more I work with plants, the more they like rewild my mind and decolonize me and connect my spirit to the great spirit of, whatever it is out there, Godhead, creation, source energy. And that itself is so complex and diverse that I can't be anything other than becoming more complex and diverse myself. So I just feel like the plants wild us.
beautiful. You were talking just before about rites of transition and rites of passage. And can you give me some stories or examples of how plants have shown up in cultures you've seen or in your own life through those rites of passage and transition times?
Yeah, yeah. One of the plants that comes to mind that, oh, I love Australian plants. So some of the plants that come to mind are Australian plants like the Acacia annua. Acacia shows up as the plant that really held some of the First Nations people in Australia. It's used at birthing to like smudge babies' birth side for cleansing. It's also used again at death times to smudge and cleanse the spirit across. But then it's also used for tool making. Um, so it can also have witchy grubs and other animals, like food source can be connected to the plant. I always find that really interesting when a plant is showing up for all these incredibly important times, but it also just holds the people and their stability and their structure. I guess another one is like the melaleuca, the tea tree. It can really show up for birthing. Like a lot of the birthing pools, some of the birthing pools are around tea tree lakes. And tea tree has such a cleansing energy and a purifying energy and really connected with the water. It always grows around water. And then babies would be held in paper bark from the tree. So, like a plant that shows up in a time of transition and holds the people and holds the culture.
Yeah, there's a dam just on the border of my property with the neighbours, and it doesn't look very healthy. And there's a couple of tea trees there. It's interesting. I was going to a retreat, and I was like, I'm going to bring some tea tree and use it as a smudge in the opening ceremony to try to connect to the land more. And I just went up and, I was like, oh, can I take a branch? And I just got this no from the tea tree. And I was like, oh, but I had that idea, and then I'm like, oh, am I just imagining it? Anyway, it's good to listen to the no's when you get them. I sat there for a bit and I was like, oh yeah, it's just this one tea tree. And I got this image that it was working really hard trying to clean this lake, this dam. It was
Mm-hmm.
like overwhelmed with the amount of work it had to do on its own. So it was like, don't take me, none of me, go away.
I got nothing to share. I'm working.
Yeah. I didn't enjoy receiving the no because I had this idea and I want to take it, and I love feeling the plants are like, yeah, I'm here for you. But it was a really beautiful moment to witness that plant in its work that had nothing to do with me and my needs.
Oh, it's such a hard concept for us to come to terms with, that like our needs may not be at the center of the world. I've heard it said by Samantha Sweetwater, a really beautiful author and woman from the States, that we're moving from a time of the hero's journey, which is kind of like what we've been in and what we're in, a lot about like our individual journey and our needs, and we're moving into the kinship journey, which is a lot more about our togetherness and our belonging. So I think, there's growing pains. Sometimes we get no's and we have to just realize, okay, there's actually a reason why my needs here might need to pivot.
You were saying in some chats we had earlier about this idea you're working with, that each plant is encoded with a place, a belonging to a land, and an emotional terrain too. And that really sparked something for me. The connection between being encoded to a place they belong to, and that somehow mapping across to an inner place in our own inner psyche that they also belong to, just felt like a juicy, poetic way of connecting two disparate aspects of plant medicine. I'd love to hear what you meant by that.
That sounds, yeah, like a beautiful thing to unpack. I feel like I'm really just at the beginning of my journey of understanding this. Like I don't have all of the plants matched up to all of the states, but this is the terrain that I've been really exploring because I'm noticing that it's true. I'm noticing that there are real patterns, that the environment a plant grows in and the way it grows and the story of its journey and the hardships of like the heat and the sun and the dryness and the sand and the water relationship. That's all part of that plant's kind of, it's either its personality or just its makeup or however we want to structure it, but it's like part of that plant. And it's the terrain of that plant and it's embedded in the land that it lives in. And then we can use that plant as food or medicine, and it matches or can like remedy and help make sense of, I guess really what it does is it holds space for that terrain inside ourselves. And that often lines up with things that we might go through in life, like grief. So there are plants that are just like so familiar with sitting in the grief. Like grief's one of the emotions where we can't really heal it. We can't send it away. The healing is actually the just sitting in it and feeling brave enough to hold ourselves in the grief for as long as we need to let it move through. And there are some plants that are just really good at holding us in our grief. Like rose is a great plant. Borage is a plant that can come up with that. I recently found that the xanthorrhea, the grass trees in Australia, the resin that comes out of them is just so perfectly suited for when somebody has passed away, because our dog passed away in our home and it was a beautiful and really confronting journey, like holding him while he died. And then after he died, like it was also really confronting, like how quickly he was gone and how quickly like death set in. And there was this energy of death in the home. And we have a lot of different resins that we've gathered from around Australia and from around the world, and we're burning different resins, and none of it felt right. It wasn't the right smell for the occasion. And as soon as my partner started burning the xanthorrhea, I've always found xanthorrhea to be like sickly sweet and uncomfortable, so I never use it because I can't find a situation where I would like that smell. But as soon as it flooded through the house, it was so appropriate for that moment. Like it was able to meet the death in the room and hold space for it, and then even shepherd it a bit out of the room. That was like one example of realizing that plant has a space that it's really intelligent of working with, and that part of medicine is sort of understanding the terrains inside ourselves and like matching them up with plants. And it's not always as internal medicine. Sometimes it's with just being in relationship to that plant, or also maybe burning it as a resin is a really great way to work with plants too.
I'm trying to remember the smell of xanthorrhea. There was a phase there when I collected a bunch, like I'm thinking 16 years ago, and that was burning it. Yeah. Maybe, and to make that link between the physical belonging that they have, it's like the xanthorrheas only reproduce in fire, right? And so then if there's a big bushfire, that they're like the ones that survive through the death of so many other plants.
Oh, that's so true. They would have to witness the death of the forest.
And so whether they're like so adept at holding the space and clearing that so that life can return.
Oh, I could go so deep with so many plants. One of the things I've actually found a bit challenging as a herbalist is having like too big an apothecary of plants, because it's like it sort of reminds me a little bit of our like consumer culture where it's like we only go a few centimeters deep on everything. And yeah, like a big part of my practice now has been like just trying to lessen and simplify and go deep with only a few things and go really deep. Like let's go kilometers deep. I mean,
Mm.
some of the traditional herbalists around the world, they would only work with like a couple of plants. You might have a medicine person who worked with one plant and they knew that plant so intimately that they knew its song. They could just sing the plant song. I mean, I even heard that the plant songs were traded like an economy. So the person that knew the song of this plant, because they only work with it and they've gone so deep with it, to have its song was like so valuable that you would have to, it was a high cost to trade that. You would
I
want to
mean,
trade it for another plant song.
I would pay a lot for a magic plant song that would like open up the healing across multiple dimensions working with that one plant, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really beautiful link to make. Like, I always end up with too many bottles of tinctures in my apothecary. And one of the reasons I do that is because I have a client and they maybe, it's happened lots of times. Someone's like, oh, I think I need chaste tree. And chaste tree is not, I don't do a lot of fertility stuff. It's not really a plant that I have a deep relationship with. I'm like, okay, I'll order some chaste tree. You know, that client never actually ended up coming. It was a friend. So then I have this bottle of chaste tree that I've literally never opened. That's just been sitting there slowly going off, right? Like, and that happens, or I think that I need a very specific plant because someone comes in with a specific condition, and I'm like, oh well, the plant that my university told me was the right plant for that is this plant that is, you know, I don't know, someone has arthritis, and I feel like I need devil's claw, right? And there's accumulation through that way, and then as you're saying, the excitement of getting new plants. It's a bit like some people might feel about their shoe collection. I don't know, I've got like a pair of thongs, a pair of gumboots, and a pair of walking shoes, right? But like some people, a lot of people have that kind of collector excitement around shoes or bags or something. I don't know, maybe some people listening have that excitement about tinctures and about shoes, whatever, good for you. But yeah, I think there is an interesting capitalist commodity obsession that comes through there. And I've been also in a very intentional process of going deep with a handful of plants. And there's now about 15 plants that I've done very deep processes with. And I'm slowly, over the next 5 years, going to move myself up to 30. And I feel like 30 will be enough to be like, to put myself the challenge of, can I just practice with these 30 plants? You know?
I love that. That is so incredible. I do feel like there's a little bit of more that can come out. And I mean, the Wedico, the greed, it can come out of all of us in any part of our work or our personal lives. And it's good to catch it and be like, is more deeper? And is that
Mm.
actually like more meaningful? Or is it just like thinking that our health issues are so unique and so complex that it needs to be this like one specific plant from the other side of the world that only grows in this, you know, specific temperature that's going to heal this specific condition? Like if the relationship and the sacredness and the interconnectedness is part of the healing, then it might not have to be as complicated as we think. We might not need more
Mm.
15 to 30 plants. That sounds like an incredible apothecary if you know those plants really deeply. It's the kind of direction I want to go into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and honestly, the way I've been going deep with that is taking groups through a process of deepening, and I'm someone who really learns that way. And so, you know, like with passion flower, which is a herb that I absolutely think of for grief, and I think my new level of understanding, going a few kilometers deep with passion flower, is that it's specifically for the kind of anxiety, addictiveness, or restlessness that comes from avoiding grief. And all the like traditional stories from like the Warani peoples around passion flower, it's stories of like kind of Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers, mutual suicide, like deaths and griefs and yearnings, you know. um and or the Mayan vine of the souls, and the flowers housing our dead kin, you know, like that those incredible flowers are actually like soul holders, right? And yeah, and the way I got there is I did a lot of reading and I took with the medicine a lot for a long time, but then I took, you know, probably like 60 people through a process of taking passion flower without them knowing what it was, and then listened very deeply to what they experienced. And then I saw over time the threads that came up. And it's amazing how often in the times we've done passion flower week, someone's lost someone close to them. And I don't know how to make sense of that, right?
Mhm.
But that's been one of the things of the plant being like, this is where I work.
Mhm.
This is where I work in grief, in death, in the harm that comes from avoiding grief and death.
And it's such a holistic way for a plant to work. Like I work in a space, I work in a feeling tone rather than like I work with a symptom. Like it's not the tip of the arrow, it's more like such a big
Or
space.
I work with GABA uptake, or something like even more specific,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Actually, to go back to what you were saying about xantheria and those plants, you were speaking a lot about resins, and I hear you talking more about indigenous plants than I'm used to hearing. So I want to hear about that because I know that as far as what's documented, indigenous medicine was primarily used in non-internal medicine, burning, smudging, resins, smoking, washes, ointments. Right? Do you know much about that?
I know a little bit about it. I'm not an expert, but I've spent a lot of time in the Northern Territory. I've lived out there on a few occasions and I travel out there once to twice a year. And I love spending time on country and just deepening my relationship with the land. And I've got a lot of books on Indigenous Australian medicine. And I've come to the same realizations that internal medicine wasn't as big as smoking medicine was. And actually, that Indigenous Australians were considered like master spirit healers. Like their relationship with smoke and the healing power of smoke is quite complex. Like they've gone really deep with that. They're masters of that. Whereas other cultures went deeper into internal medicines or different ways. That's like where Australia's land has really connected with fire and smoke. So they've got a lot of different plants that are used for burning and then smoking the body as cleansing, and like that a lot of the healing practices are around like gathering different plants and smoking different plants. It's a big
Um,
part of all the rituals as well.
when you say smoking, just to be clear, you're not referring to
Oh yeah,
internally breathing the smoke in, but
no,
like kind of a smudging style of like a big smoking fire that we cleanse the space
exactly,
with.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they do it with green leaves. There's a few ways that I've seen it done or had it done to me. It's like big batches of fresh green leaves that are put on embers of a fire, and all the vapors and resins of the plant burn, but they're not actually, the plant's not on fire. You keep batting it out if it's ever on fire, so it's smoldering and smoking. And then another way is to warm up the fresh leaves of different plants like ironwood and different melaleucas, lots of different eucalypts, different acacias. And then the leaves will get really warm, and it's a little bit like Olympia that's in South American cultures, and it's like batting the body and wiping the body with these hot leaves. And then those are placed into the fire and burnt away. They wouldn't be shared on anybody else. They have different processes around using. It's like quite broad application. Like there's lots of different health issues that would be used for just like you have a smoking cleanse. So, but I don't know heaps of depth around it. I'm just very marveled in that technology and that practice because it seems like it's really connected with a sense of place and belonging and ceremony as well. Like it's not, it's the same rituals that are used for celebrating and marking time are used for healing sickness.
Yeah, but back again to that story of like the medicine is also in the way that the plant brings us back into relationship and reminds us what it is to be human, even if it's not through ingesting the plant, but just like actually gathering the plant together and smoking it. Actually, when you say that, I think I'm so into fresh plant tinctures. I've just been getting more and more into fresh plant tinctures for that aliveness of spirit and also the aromatic aspect. And think of all those aromatic plants that grow in Australia, all the eucalypts, and getting them green and smoldering them. There must be, I don't know, like what's your experience when you've had that happen? Is it so fragrant, the smoke?
It's really fragrant. It's really beautiful. And having the leaves wiped over my body, it's so warm. It's like kind of like a hot stone massage. My sense is that when spirit is cleansed in the body or spirit is housed back on its throne in our heart, a lot of things remedy. So we don't always have to go and take herbs that are specific for like certain health issues. We can just like come home to ourselves and the very like connectedness we can have with our body. And when the emperor's on the throne, the kingdom's in good relation. So I always feel like that's maybe connected to how this sort of smoke therapy can work on so many layers of sickness. It's like about returning the spirit. But that's like definitely just my opinion. I don't like
Yeah, I mean,
research around that.
it sounds like you're, using some TCM concepts, mapping them across what you're
Yeah.
seeing with smoking and some of the other work that you've been unpacking in your use of herbs in like a Western herbal clinic. And I think that's actually such an important thing for practitioners to be doing, is being able to try and take the really useful ideas from different cultures with respect and try and understand what that tells us about
Mm.
healing, right? Not just being like, oh, that looks cool, I'm going to appropriate that, but be like, oh, well, what's actually happening there? How can that experience I'm having in this Mayan village with an abuelita speaking Mazatec, how does that experience actually help me understand health and healing and medicine more deeply? Rather than just like, that was cool, I'm going to take it and do it somewhere else. How does my experience in it with indigenous smoking practices actually enlighten me more fully as to the nature of healing and medicine, right? That
Yeah. What you're talking about is called fin fairing. I've heard Tyson Yokapura talk about it. And it's when a culture, especially if a culture has been a bit damaged or has like maybe lost their lineages, they'll go and sit with another culture, a neighboring culture or something that's a little bit more intact and see what practices they have. And then they go back home and they don't copy the practices, but they re-inspire their own, they re-infuse their own culture with what's inspired them from that culture. So it's like fin fairing.
yeah, I think I'm going to try and find that podcast episode. I completely forgot about that term, but it's so great to have a term for that, because there is that challenge of, as a any kind of non-indigenous Australian person living in Australia, there's a desire to connect with indigenous practices. There's a desire to connect and to be part of the healing and the reinvigorating and the rehoming of those practices and that wisdom, but you want to do it in a way that's not ick.
Yeah.
And I think fin fairing gives us a language around what that might look like.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got aromatic plants. I mean, we could be experimenting with what it's like to put some rosemary on a fresh fire and see if it lets out its aromatics. And yeah, we can be
Absolutely.
inspired by cultures all around us. But something else I've learned from the First Nations people that I've hung out with in Australia is some of the reason why the knowledge of the medicine isn't super accessible is because it's not even accessible to them. So like lineages have been broken and culture's been broken for them, and it's really at a point that um, that those cultures are just sort of trying to gather their own knowledge back together. It's not at a point of like being able to now share it and write elaborate books about it. Just at a different phase of its healing because everything's so recent. One of the beautiful things about moving down here to Bellingen has been to be able to go to language classes. There's that Uncle Mikolo here, and he shares Gumbaynggirr language classes like 3 times a week. And he's educated me into realizing that, yeah, the culture here, they've already, he had to relearn his language when he was a child. And now it's at a point that it can come into the schools and people around the community can learn it. So now there are some fluent speakers, like white fellas in town who are fluent speakers, pretty fluent, and just to realize that every country's got a different story. Like that's not accessible up north in Bunjalung. It's not at that point yet. But it's been really healing and beautiful to realize that there are other areas that just further along the healing journey and culture's been reinvigorated and now language can get shared. I also think like, you know, some of these plants and the stories, like they have names in other languages, and some of the healing is just in speaking about things in a different way. Like English is such a funny language. There's concepts that get said in like I learned a bit of Noongar, and that was from WA. And the word for waterway and the word for umbilical cord is the same word, bilya. And that happens a lot in Gumbaynggirr too. Like the words sometimes can feel quite obscure, like how the words are for say two totally different concepts in English, but it's the same word. And I feel like that patterning is speaking to something deeper that is, yeah, also in the medicine of plants. Like there's like a deeper mystery beyond English.
Yeah. Yeah. What's so lucky to be able to access language classes. My daughter's at preschool and they're really into they're into using the Bunjalung seasons, so the 6 seasons of the year. And definitely, I've for a long time been really inspired by my own people's Celtic kind of seasonal wheel of the year. But then the more that I work with that, like the equinoxes and the solstice, sure, they're marking a thing that is kind of global in a way, right? Because it's around the positioning of the earth around the sun. But when it comes to the other things, Beltane, Samhain, these are actually Ostara. These are harvest festivals. They're festivals that make sense in a temperate agricultural community, and they're not actually marking anything real in the land that I live and the life that I lead, right? And
Yeah.
so then coming to a place of being like, well, then what is that? And so it's been really nice to just experiment with being like, oh, even though I'm not actually using the indigenous names, I can't remember them so far, I've got to write them up somewhere. Just being like, oh, now we're at the end of windy season, and the wet season's going to start, and just recognizing that, like, oh, after the cold season comes the storm season, after the storm season comes the goanna season, and that's when we should be really careful for snakes because it's warming up and all of the creatures come out, and then comes the windy season, and then comes the wet season, and this it's so nice to actually be like, oh, that connects a lot more. And so I'm in this process now of returning to watching and listening so that I can find what are those kinds of seasonal time shifting festivals that I can create with my family that feel aligned to the actual movement of the land and what changes in our lives.
Mhm. Yeah, the movement of our ancestors off of their ancestral lands and our religious birthplace into this foreign place now has been a huge disconnection for our sense of spirit, culture, and it's like a deep disconnection that our culture is really trying to rehabilitate. So finding a way to connect into the actual land that we're living on and the seasons of it feels like a big part of the health piece. Like I've been mapping the seasons every year, and I reflect I resonate with so much of what you said. Things feel a bit like out of rhythm when I'm celebrating like the ancestral pagan days at all the wrong times. It just doesn't feel like the right cycles. And I love when the cycle of the weather and the seasons is syncing up with the cyclical knowledge of my body and plants. Like plants show up at certain times too. Like right now it's so hot and it's like damp heat time. Like it's muggy and wet. And there's just certain plants that are really good for working with those terrains, like rosemary and sage. And there's certain foods and practices that are really good to practice at this time, like to not eat heaps of heavy, oily food because it's damp heat time in the outside world. So we're going to be prone to damp heat inside ourselves.
Mm.
And I'm really passionate about like trying to map that all a bit more over the year for our lands that we're living on here and what plants we can have access to. I think it helps us feel like connected to the rhythms of life. And as a woman, like being connected to my rhythm is like when my health is thriving.
Just, like I feel so sad. Literally, like I actually feel grief. I went to the supermarket a couple of days ago here in Wollongbar, and there's pretend pine branches and pretend snow, and I'm like, that is just
Oh,
it's so sad. It's like the only big seasonal festival that we have, and we can't even, like, it should be like mango festival, and like, where Australians go to the beach and have mango, and like that's what we should be decorating our houses with. Halloween wasn't really a thing when I was a kid, but I'm seeing it more and more in like pumpkins. But it's not pumpkin season. Like you've got to go and get like pumpkins from last year to carve a jack-o'-lantern. Like at the very least, do Halloween in May or
oh.
March.
I feel like it doesn't really make sense because we're celebrating something at the same time that those plants that are the symbol of that celebration, they're thriving. So it's
Exactly.
all got to be in time together. Like that's what we're celebrating, being in the belonging, being in our interbeing. If we're not in the interbeing because we're like importing snow and pine needles or pumpkins from the other side of the country, then it doesn't make me feel connected and healthy. Doesn't make me feel like I belong or make
Yeah.
sense. It's all a bit
And
confusing.
exactly what you're saying. Like then we're planning this big Christmas feast for our family that's entirely a damp heat kind of feast. In the damp heat kind of, so I'm maybe pushing our Christmas tradition to be a bit more Asiatic. So starting with a kind of prawn and mango and avocado salad with like lots of Thai basil and mint and things that are like sharp and pungent. Even though you know I love the sense of connectivity to my ancestors, I'd rather make that meal in the middle of winter, which is not snow but it's still cold here,
Mm.
and then make Christmas more midsummer celebration, right? What does that look like? What would that mean if we actually were celebrating the peak of summer in Australia?
Yeah, it would look so different, right? There's so much fruit, and I mean, we've got a lot to celebrate. An amazing climate, amazing food production. Like, I'd love to
Amazing
celebrate
beaches. Yeah.
amazing beaches and water, riverways.
Yeah. Look, there's one more thought that I had that I want to share, that you were talking about, the way that the healing is so much more than the constituents around that sense of returning to relationship. And what I've noticed lately, is that I've actually been selling consultations in packs of 3 or 6. Don't sell them individually anymore, because the pressure that an expectation then to work magic in one session is too much for me and probably too much for the other person. And so I notice now that I have this sense of freedom. Often in the first consultation, I actually don't even prescribe herbs. And that feels interesting as a herbalist, right? And sometimes I do, but often I'm working with a narrative reframe for people. And it doesn't always land, because I'm still in the beginning of offering that. But one example I'll give you is, recently I had a woman with chronic pain, and she's really fixated on, like, why do I have this pain? What's happening? What have I done wrong? What's my trauma I haven't healed? And I spent a whole session just being like, that's a really dangerous story. Lots of people have way more trauma than you, and they don't have chronic pain. Lots of people have done way worse, quote unquote, if that's how you're thinking about it. And actually, maybe the question shouldn't be, how do we just magically get rid of your pain, but how do we help you thrive? And what does that look like? And what would actually look like for you to thrive? And some pain may still be there. And you may be thriving. And ideally, let's work with your pain to see how low we can get it. But it might, like, reframing away from just like, I've got to find the thing that's going to make my pain go away, which is how she'd been operating for years. And then after that, there was a very different energy the next session around, okay, what herbs could we use? Let's look at what that might look like. Let's trial this herb. And even then, the expectation she had around what the herbs were going to do was very different.
Sounds like you're working so much more on the terrain. Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think about how we can be so answer oriented. And I think a lot of the healing's about in asking the right question, but not even necessarily arriving at an answer. It's just about what question you're asking yourself. Like what relationship am I having with pain? Like, let's explore that. We don't need to arrive at a place that is a fixed answer. We just need to keep asking that question.
Awesome. I think that's a really beautiful place to leave, like, to keep asking the right questions as healers. And that then gives a lot of sense of authority to the person who is there, like supporting them to find the answers that work for them. And plants may be things that we offer, right, and experiment with, but we don't have to be the one being like, I have the magic bottle of mixed herbs things that will cure you from your problem, my child, and then what a relief to be in a situation of like, I'm here to be a support and to be a holder of the plants for you guys to meet each other and find your way.
Yeah, a lot more like herbalist is a bit more of a midwife than anything. I'm just going to midwife this process. It's between you and your body. Connect you with what you need along the way. It's been lovely chatting to you, Stephanie.
Yeah, you too, Rachel. So nice. I feel like we could chat for hours, but let's end here. And yeah, good luck on your new ventures in Bellingen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, really, really great.
That's us for this moon cycle. I'm so glad you walked into the dark forest with me. This podcast is part of The Elder Tree, a non-profit dedicated to empowering people through grassroots herbal education, weaving a strong community of herbalists, healers and plant folk in Australia. You can head over to theeldertree.org to find out more. If you like this episode, we'd love you to subscribe. And if you know who we should interview next, drop us a line. See you next month, and in the meantime, may you be blessed with good health and many plants.